In this video, we're about to relive one of the most extreme sailing feats ever attempted. A 70-year-old sailor, armed with nothing but determination and a 20-foot sailboat, set out to face the frozen fury of Cape Horn, the deadliest cape on Earth. What unfolded is a raw, gripping story of human endurance, seamanship, and survival against merciless cold, violent seas, and the kind of isolation that would break most sailors. This isn't just about the challenge. It's about what happens when age, size, and logic say no, but the sea calls anyway. We'll break down the choices he made, the gear he trusted, the near-fatal mistakes, and the lessons every sailor can learn from this journey. From brutal waves to the chilling winds of the Southern Ocean, this voyage tested the very limits of human capability. So stay with us, because by the end of this video, you'll not only know how he survived, but you'll understand why this story matters to anyone who dares to dream beyond the horizon. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to keep following real stories of courage, caution, and adventure on the open sea. Let's begin. The wind cut like invisible blades, howling through the Beagle Channel, as John Smith, at 70 years old, adjusted the sails of his small Flicka 20 sailboat, christened Sea Sprite. It was a cold winter morning in Ushuaia, Argentina, the southernmost city in the world, where the gray sky seemed to touch the icy waters. John, with his calloused hands and eyes that carried decades of maritime stories, felt the weight of the moment. He was about to embark on the journey of his life, to round Cape Horn, the legendary Everest of sailors, a place where the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans collide in a symphony of fury and beauty. But what he didn't know was that fate, as unpredictable as the waves awaiting him, had prepared a test that would challenge not only his skill, but his very existence. John was no novice. Born in a small coastal town in Maine, he had grown up among fishing nets and wooden boats, learning to sail before he could even read. At 20, he crossed the Atlantic in an old sloop with friends, facing storms that nearly swallowed them. At 40, he circumnavigated the Caribbean islands, and at 60, he completed a solo crossing of the South Pacific. Every wrinkle on his face told a story of headwinds, sleepless nights, and moments of pure communion with the sea. But Cape Horn was different. Known for its extreme conditions, winds up to 60 knots, 30-foot waves, drifting icebergs, and sudden weather changes, the Cape was a landmark of legend and tragedy, where over 800 ships had wrecked and 10,000 sailors had lost their lives over the centuries. The choice of the Sea Sprite, a 20-foot Flicka 20, was bold, almost reckless. Designed by Bruce Bingham and built by Pacific Seacraft, the Flicka 20 was a robust American sailboat, with over 400 units manufactured between 1974 and 1998. Though small, its fiberglass hull with a full keel and 6,000-pound displacement made it surprisingly stable for offshore cruising. With a total length of 24 feet, including the bowsprit, 18.17 feet at the waterline, and a draft of 3.25 feet, the boat was compact but reliable. Its cutter rig, with a mainsail, staysail, and genoa, allowed flexibility in varying conditions. The 10-horsepower diesel engine, 20-gallon fuel tank, and 30-gallon water tank ensured autonomy for long passages. John spent 2 years preparing the Sea Sprite for the challenge. He reinforced the rigging with larger diameter steel cables, installed 100-watt solar panels to power the electrical systems, and a portable desalinator to ensure fresh water. For navigation, he equipped the boat with a modern GPS, a chart plotter, VHF radio, long-range SSB radio, and a satellite phone. Safety was a priority. An EPIRB, emergency position indicating radio beacon, a 2-person life raft, life jackets with harnesses, fire extinguishers, storm sails, and a drogue were carefully stowed. A wind vane self-steering system was added to reduce fatigue on long passages, essential for a solo sailor of his age. He also stocked tools, spare parts, and a basic fiberglass repair kit. But, as he would later reflect, he may not have given enough attention to scenarios involving severe hull damage. John's preparation went beyond the boat. He spent months studying nautical charts, weather reports, and accounts from other sailors who had faced Cape Horn. He read about the exploits of historical navigators like Willem Schouten and Jacob Lemaire, who in 1616 named the Cape after the Dutch city of Hoorn. He drew inspiration from modern figures, such as members of the International Association of Cape Horners, an exclusive club for those who completed the passage. He trained his physical endurance with long walks and strength exercises, knowing that at 70, his body no longer had the vitality of decades past. He consulted experienced sailors in online forums and yacht clubs, absorbing tips on handling strong winds and giant waves. But in his eagerness to fulfill his dream, he ignored some warnings. Colleagues suggested a larger boat, like a Westsail 32, would be safer, and others cautioned about the presence of icebergs even outside the harsh winter. The departure from Ushuaia was a moment of introspection. It was early May 2025, winter in the southern hemisphere, a risky time to sail, but John wanted to avoid the tourist boat traffic that crowded the region in summer. He checked the Sea Sprite one last time, adjusted the sails and cast off, feeling the boat glide smoothly through the Beagle Channel. The snow-covered mountains of Tierra del Fuego loomed in the background, and the silence was broken only by the sound of water against the hull and the distant cry of seagulls. John felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. "It's now or never," he murmured to himself, adjusting the helm as the wind began to blow stronger. The Beagle Channel, with its sheltered waters, was a deceptively calm start. John passed by Porto Williams on Navarino Island and spotted the lights of lighthouses marking the way. He sailed carefully, mindful of strong currents that could push the boat against hidden rocks. The GPS and chart plotter worked perfectly, and the wind vane kept the course effortlessly, allowing him brief moments of rest. During the first few days, the weather cooperated, with moderate winds of 15 to 20 knots and temperatures near 0 degrees Celsius. He cooked simple meals on the alcohol stove, read passages from Moby Dick at night, and jotted down observations in a logbook. "The sea is an old friend," he wrote one night, "but I know it keeps secrets it doesn't reveal." As he approached Herschel Island, the landscape changed. The sheltered waters of the channel gave way to the open ocean, where the waves began to grow and the wind gained strength. John reduced sail, swapping the Genoa for a smaller staysail, and adjusted his course to the southwest, toward Cape Horn, about 100 nautical miles away. The Drake Passage, the stretch between South America and Antarctica, was known for its brutal conditions, and John knew he was entering a territory where nature called the shots. He obsessively checked weather reports via satellite, but technology had its limits. Forecasts for Cape Horn were notoriously inaccurate due to the convergence of weather systems. On the night of the 5th day, the sky darkened rapidly and the barometer dropped alarmingly. John felt a tightness in his chest. Storm ahead, he thought, as the wind climbed to 40 knots, whipping the sea's surface into white foam. He furled all sails except the storm sail and secured himself in the cockpit with a harness. The waves, now 15 to 20 feet, lifted the Sea Sprite like a toy, tossing it from side to side. The darkness was nearly total, broken only by the intermittent glow of the Cape Horn lighthouse, visible in the distance. John struggled to stay calm, repeating the procedures he had memorized. Keep the boat at an angle to the waves, use the drogue if needed, and trust the safety equipment. Then disaster struck. Around 2 a.m., with the storm at its peak, the Sea Sprite was jolted by a sudden, deafening impact. The boat lurched violently to starboard, and John was thrown against the cockpit, feeling a sharp pain in his shoulder. "What was that?" he shouted into the wind, though no one could hear him. He rushed to inspect the boat, holding on to safety lines as waves crashed over the deck. Below in the cabin, his worst fears were confirmed. Icy water was pouring in rapidly through a hole in the hull, just below the waterline on the port bow. The impact, likely with a drifting iceberg, a common hazard in the region, even in May, had cracked the fiberglass, creating an opening about 30 centimeters wide. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but John took a deep breath and sprang into action. He knew that without immediate repairs, the Sea Sprite would sink in minutes. His first move was to activate the bilge pumps, one electric and one manual, which began expelling water, but not fast enough. He needed to seal the hole, at least temporarily. Recalling an ancient technique called fathering, used by sailors since the 18th century, he grabbed a spare sail a sturdy piece of canvas, and began preparing it. The idea was to wrap the canvas around the hull, covering the hole, and secure it with ropes passed under the boat. It was a nearly impossible task in the midst of the storm, but John had no choice. He tied the canvas with ropes, climbed onto the slippery deck, and, with the help of an auxiliary inflatable dinghy, tried to position the canvas under the hull. The waves pushed him against the boat, and the freezing water soaked his thermal clothing, leaving him shivering. After nearly an hour of struggle, he managed to pass the ropes under the Sea Sprite and tighten the canvas against the hull. The water ingress slowed but didn't stop completely. The bilge pumps kept working, but the electric ones showed signs of overload, likely due to moisture in the circuits. Exhausted, John returned to the cabin and checked the GPS. He was about 50 nautical miles from Cape Horn, too far from any safe harbor. Knowing the repair was temporary, John made a critical decision: activate the EPIRB. The device, designed to send a distress signal with his exact location, was his best chance for rescue. He pressed the button, feeling a mix of relief and despair. Now it was a matter of waiting and surviving. He adjusted the course to the northwest, hoping to approach the Chilean coast, but the wind and waves made progress nearly impossible. The Sea Sprite rocked dangerously, and the fathering canvas began to give way under the water's pressure. As the hours passed, John faced not only the storm, but also his own demons. The solitude of the sea, once a refuge, now felt suffocating. He thought of his family, his children he hadn't seen in months, and his wife who had passed away 10 years earlier, a memory that spurred him to keep going. "You've been through worse, old man," he told himself, but the voice sounded weak against the ocean's roar. He began to feel the first signs of hypothermia, with numb hands and blurred vision. To stay awake, he sang old sea shanties, a habit he'd picked up on his early voyages. The hours dragged on like an eternity, and the Sea Sprite continued to battle the relentless sea. John Smith, at 70, was soaked, exhausted, and on the brink of hypothermia, but his determination kept him clinging to life. The hole in the Flicka 20's hull, caused by the iceberg collision, had been temporarily sealed with the fathering technique, a spare sail tied around the boat. But the canvas was giving way under the waves' pressure, and icy water continued to flood the cabin. The bilge pumps, one electric and one manual, worked tirelessly, but the electric one emitted troubling hisses, a sign that moisture was compromising the circuits. John, confined to the cockpit, gripped the helm with trembling hands, trying to keep the boat on an unsteady northwest course, hoping to near the Chilean coast. The EPIRB, activated hours earlier, blinked silently, sending its distress signal into the void of the Drake Passage. The storm showed no mercy. Winds of 50 to 60 knots roared, turning the sea into a chaos of foam and waves that lifted the Sea Sprite to dizzying crests before plunging it into deep troughs. The Cape Horn lighthouse, briefly glimpsed before the impact, was now lost in the darkness. John felt the weight of solitude like never before. For decades, the sea had been his sanctuary, a place where he found peace and purpose. But now, with the boat on the verge of collapse and his body at its limit, he faced the possibility that this would be his final voyage. "I won't give up," he muttered, his hoarse voice barely audible against the wind's howl. He thought of his late wife, Clara, whose smile still warmed him in distant memories. "You always said I was too stubborn to die, darling." Exhaustion began to play tricks on his mind. At one point, he swore he saw a figure on the deck, a sailor in a yellow slicker, like the fisherman of his Maine childhood. He blinked hard, and the vision vanished, leaving only the faint glow of the navigation light. Hallucinations, he knew, were a dangerous sign. To stay lucid, John began reciting the emergency procedures he'd memorized. Check pumps, monitor the fathering, maintain course, conserve energy. He also sang, a practice that had accompanied him since his early voyages. "Oh, Shenandoah, I long to hear you," he crooned, his voice faltering as waves crashed over the cockpit, soaking him further. As he fought, John reflected on the mistakes that led to this crisis. His decision to sail in winter, though driven by a desire to avoid summer traffic, was an unnecessary risk. He had underestimated the presence of icebergs, common in the Drake Passage even outside the coldest season, as worn by experienced sailors in Ushuaia. The Flicka 20, though sturdy, was too small for Cape Horn's extreme conditions, and he had ignored suggestions to use a larger boat, like a Westsail 32. Most critically, his fiberglass repair kit, though present, was inadequate for such severe damage at sea. He had basic tools, resin, fiberglass patches, sandpaper, but applying them to a submerged hull during a storm was impossible. "If I survive it," he vowed, "I'll tell everyone. Never skimp on preparation." The fathering, though ingenious, was starting to fail. The canvas, subjected to the wave's constant pressure, was tearing at the edges, and water ingress increased. John went below to inspect, clinging to handholds as the boat pitched violently. The water now reached his ankles, soaking supplies and equipment. He tried to reinforce the canvas with more ropes, but the effort was exhausting, and every movement drained his strength. The electric pump finally gave out, a victim of moisture, leaving only the manual one, which required intense physical effort. John pumped with one hand while holding a flashlight with the other, its beam revealing the chaos in the cabin. Soaked charts, floating clothes, and the SSB radio, now useless, covered in salt water. Despite the despair, John held on to a thread of hope. The EPIRB was his lifeline. He knew the device, registered with maritime authorities, was transmitting his exact position into rescue centers like the MRCC, Maritime Rescue Coordination Center, in Punta Arenas, Chile. But Cape Horn was one of the planet's most remote regions, and rescue could take hours, perhaps days. He checked his life jacket, secured to his body and the life raft, lashed to the deck, ready to inflate if the Sea Sprite sank. "I won't need it," he told himself, trying to believe it. But the reality was harsh. If the boat went down, his chances of surviving in the Drake Passage's icy waters, where temperatures hovered around 2 degrees Celsius, were slim. Hypothermia would kill him in minutes. As he pumped water, John thought about the lessons this experience was teaching him. Lessons he wanted to share if he survived. The first was the importance of robust repair kits. A more advanced kit, with quick-fix patches and instant-cure resin, could have sealed the hole more effectively. He also regretted not training repair techniques in adverse conditions, something experienced sailors recommended. Another lesson was vigilance. He should have used the radar more frequently to detect icebergs, even in the dark. Finally, equipment redundancy, like a second waterproof electric pump, could have made a difference. "If I get out of this," he thought, "I'll write a book about what not to do." About 6 hours after activating the EPIRB, a distant sound pierced the storm's roar, the hum of a helicopter. John felt a tightness in his chest, a mix of relief and disbelief. He rushed to the deck, ignoring the pain in his injured shoulder, and lit a flare, its red glow illuminating the chaos around him. The helicopter, belonging to the Chilean Navy, hovered above, battling fierce winds. A spotlight swept the Sea Sprite, and a voice crackled over the VHF radio. "Sailboat Sea Sprite, this is Chilean Maritime Rescue. Prepare for evacuation," John shouted back, his voice hoarse, confirming his position. He knew abandoning the boat was his only option, but the thought of leaving the Sea Sprite, his companion through so many seas, was a blow to the heart. The rescue was a risky process. A cable was lowered from the helicopter, and John, with trembling hands, attached it to his harness. The waves kept pounding, and the boat rocked dangerously, but he managed to hold on as he was hoisted. The cold bit into his skin, and the wind threatened to tear him from the cable. But within minutes, he was inside the helicopter, wrapped in thermal blankets by a rescuer. "You're a lucky man," the pilot said in accented English. John only nodded, unable to speak, as he looked out the window and saw the Sea Sprite vanish into the waves, perhaps forever. In the hospital in Punta Arenas, John was treated for mild hypothermia and a shoulder injury. As he recovered, he reflected on the experience, writing in a notebook given to him by a nurse. He thought about the mistakes he'd made, choosing winter, over-relying on the Flicka 20, lacking an adequate repair kit. But he also thought about what he'd done right, activating the EPIRB quickly, staying calm under pressure, and using fathering to buy time. He knew his survival was a testament to the importance of safety equipment and preparation, but also to human resilience. John decided to share his story, not just as an adventure tale, but as a guide for other sailors. He listed practical lessons. Always inspect the hull before a long passage, especially in iceberg-prone areas. Invest in emergency repair kits, like fiberglass patches and quick-cure sealants. Train techniques like fathering in controlled conditions, and never underestimate the importance of redundancies, like extra pumps and waterproof communication systems. He also stressed the need for safety equipment, like the EPIRB that literally saved his life, and the life raft, ready in case the worst happened. A life jacket isn't an accessory, he wrote. It's a promise to come home. The experience also made him reflect on the maritime culture he loved so much. The sea, with its traditions and stories, taught humility. He thought of past navigators, like the Dutch who faced Cape Horn in the 17th century without GPS or EPIRBs, relying only on sextants and courage. The International Association of Cape Horners, a club he dreamed of joining, celebrated that resilience, and John, even without completing the passage, felt part of that lineage. He also thought of sea shanties, superstitions, like never whistling on board to avoid calling the wind, and the stories shared in ports, which united sailors across eras. Back in Maine months later, John began giving talks at yacht clubs, sharing his story with young and seasoned sailors alike. He showed photos of the Sea Sprite, recounted the storm and the iceberg, and emphasized the lessons learned. The sea doesn't forgive mistakes, he said, but it rewards those who are prepared. He also wrote articles for nautical magazines, detailing emergency procedures and recommending essential gear. One article titled "Surviving Cape Horn: Lessons from a Near Shipwreck" became required reading in sailing schools. To engage other sailors, John ended his talks with questions. Have you ever faced hull damage at sea? How did you handle it? How would you prepare for a long passage? What safety strategies would you implement on your voyage? These questions sparked lively debates, with sailors sharing their own experiences and insights. He also interviewed a former Chilean Navy commander who detailed the challenges of rescues in the Drake Passage, and a boat builder who explained how to reinforce hulls for extreme conditions, adding credibility to his recommendations. Though the Sea Sprite was lost, likely sunk or destroyed by the waves, John felt no bitterness. He knew the boat had served its purpose, pushing him to his limits and bringing him back. He planned to buy another sailboat, perhaps a bit larger, and continue sailing, but with a new perspective. The sea was a demanding master, but also a generous teacher. His journey to Cape Horn, though incomplete, had transformed him. He was no longer just a sailor chasing a trophy. He was a survivor with a story to tell, a story that could save lives. As he wrote his memoirs on a quiet night, with the sound of waves in the background, John smiled. Cape Horn beat me this time, he thought, but it taught me how to live. He closed the notebook, turned off the light, and dreamed of the sea, no longer as an adversary, but as an old friend who, despite everything, always welcomed him.